Actually, the leap of faith, to give it the memorable name that Soren Kierkegaard bestowed upon it, is an imposture. As he himself pointed out, it is not a leap that can be made once and for all. It is a leap that has to go on and on being performed in spite of mounting evidence to the contrary. This effort is actually too much for the human mind and leads to delusions and manias. Religion understands perfectly well that the leap is subject to sharply diminishing returns, which is why it often doesn't in fact rely on faith at all, but instead corrupts faith and insults reason.
You are listening to A Leap of Doubt, the podcast that celebrates science, secular humanism, and the courage it takes to embrace an evidence-based life of doubt and questioning. Hello and welcome to episode number 5 of A Leap of Doubt. I am up to 5 episodes now. Joining me for this episode is Amy with an I, whom a few listeners might know as one of the hosts of Secular Soup, which is also a new podcast not too much older than mine. There's another Amy on that podcast who spells her name with a Y. Welcome to A Leap of Doubt, Amy with an I.
Thank you. Yeah, we don't talk about the other one.
She talks enough for 2 people, I think.
Exactly.
Well, as will soon be made pretty clear as I put out more episodes, I have a deep interest in deconversion stories, the stories of people who, for one reason or another, have abandoned one way of thinking for a better, more reason-oriented one that is receptive to new information and basing one's existence on evidence. These departures are usually from religion because of what the word deconversion kind of denotes. But to me, this also includes like pseudoscientific or paranormal beliefs that are just as closed off from reality as religion. And Amy is here to talk about Mormonism and her departure from it.
I am, yeah.
You weren't actually a convert to religion.
I was born and raised a Mormon.
You were a native to
yes.
religion.
I'm going to date myself here. I left when I was 33, and that was over 4 years ago. So, yikes.
So you left in your Jesus year, 33.
Yeah, I beat him. I won. I lived longer than Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Congratulations.
Wow. Thank you.
Born and raised a Mormon.
Yeah.
What was that like? Were you in a large family?
I have one brother and one sister, so it was pretty average sized.
Okay, because I haven't known a lot of Mormons, including when I was growing up, because I was raised a Protestant Baptist. But
I don't really talk to Mormons.
No. But the very few encounters I've had with Mormonism in general, a lot of them seem to come from large families.
My husband is the oldest of 9.
Wow.
A lot of my friends and cousins have 6 kids at least. There's lots of large families because they do tell you to have as many children as your body can handle. So your job as a woman is to have babies. That was what I was told my entire life. Was my primary focus is to become a wife and mother and have as many babies as my body can handle.
See, and that's one similarity that I'm familiar with between Mormonism and some more, I don't want to say mainstream denominations, because Baptists are considered mainstream, but they're
Correct.
Still kind of
Catholic and,
Yeah, they're still kind of more on the fundamentalist side.
Absolutely.
But I grew up around people who had large families. I am one of 6 kids, and I have 5 sisters. Most of the families I knew were also large families, and they weren't quite of the quiverful variety, but they had kind of the same mindset of be fruitful and multiply.
Right. That's pretty much, what else am I good for?
In fact, one of the families that attended my family's church when I was growing up, the father in that family was an ex-Mormon himself. So he deconverted from Mormonism, but joined up with Baptist Christianity instead.
That's not better.
No. And he
it's more
went
of
on
a lateral move, not really a
Yeah, it's a lateral move.
Up. Yeah.
And he did presentations about how Mormonism is wrong, and he actually started a ministry trying to convert Mormons to
that's not going to go well.
The real Christianity. So, how do Mormons view women? Because I, just a few months ago, I had a couple Mormon missionaries knock on my door, two young women, and we started talking, and they were surprised because the conversation actually went beyond me just saying I'm an atheist. Because usually they say, when the few people who say that usually just say I'm not interested and close the door.
Right. No one talks to them really.
Yeah, and not just atheists, but most people in general. But
right.
they were especially not expecting someone who said they were an atheist to keep talking to them. So we got into a pretty interesting discussion, and they wanted to talk more. So they had me meet them at their church to have a fuller discussion. And so I agreed to that. And
interesting. Yeah, most people don't do that. You went to the second location.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of a sucker for conversations with people who are like ideologically different from me. And we had a large part of our conversation was about the treatment of women in Mormonism, which I asked them about, and they were pretty insistent, almost to the point of like protesting too much, that Mormonism is very progressive toward women.
It's not.
So give us like your perspective on Mormonism's treatment of women.
I actually have this quote that it's not a Mormon quote. It's from Erica Jong. It's that kind of fits the best. It's women are the only exploited group in history to have been idealized into powerlessness. That's kind of how it is they're put on a pedestal, and they are, women are more spiritual, they're maternal, they're so sweet, they're wonderful, but they have no real power. They're basically stripped of everything that really matters. But it's not noticeable because everybody's talking about how great women are. So it's I didn't really notice it. It's one of those things. It's very benevolent sexism, where from an early age, you're told that men and women are powerful spirits, and they each have their own roles. And we have in the gospel, we each play our own roles. And then we're told, women get to be mothers. They get to have the children, and they get to stay home, and they get to do all these things. And men have the burden. This is what I was told, at least. They have the burden of having to, be the leader of the family and financially support the family and all of this. It wasn't until I was older that I realized, but they're also the fathers. So how is my being the mother, how is that my role when they actually have the same equal role of being a father, plus all of the authority? So in every leadership position across the board, it's all men, primarily white men, honestly, in America mostly. The women are only over other women and children. And it's called auxiliary, which it means, doesn't auxiliary mean like not really important?
Kind of secondary, kind of a backup.
So they're auxiliary leaders, and they're allowed to go to like presidency meetings and stuff, but only the beginning part, and then they leave. And then it's all the priesthood holders, which are all the men that are over everybody else. And every woman has to report to a man. Even in the scouting programs, women are Cub Scout leaders, but then the den master or whatever, I don't know scouting program really, but the one over all of it is a man. Always. Everybody reports. You have to run all budget things. You have to run everything through a man. That's kind of how it is, where you're kind of like given leadership and you're given roles of authority, but it feels very patronizing once you're outside of it. They're giving you a toy to play with just to distract you from, everything else. But I was always, I'm kind of, I'm a dissenter, so what do I know?
So they actually framed it that way, like, how magnanimous.
It's called auxiliary.
Well, yeah, but what's crazy to me is that they frame it in the way of, how magnanimous is it for men to take the burden of leadership?
Yes, that's exactly it. You don't want the burden. You don't want can you imagine how much stress it is to have you're only in charge of yourself and your children. Can you imagine having all your entire family on your shoulders. Can you imagine how hard it is to have the entire congregation on your shoulders? It was always a kindness. It was a nice thing.
Yeah, I recall when I was a teenager, the pastor of my church talking about the role of women, and he was also trying to frame it in a way that was palatable to modern sensibilities. Mm-hmm. And the way he put it was that men should never mistreat or abuse women. So far, so good.
Right.
But he said you should treat your wife, and he didn't talk about any other relationship between besides man and wife.
Right.
But he said you should treat your wife as if she was a trophy. And your trophy should be one of your most prized possessions. And
that's the problem, though, is the possession thing.
Yeah, he didn't call it a possession, but he said you wouldn't mistreat anything that you held dear, such as a trophy. And you should treat your wives the same way, treasure them and value them. I remember my sister a few years later, after we had both left that way of thinking, saying, what if I don't want to be a trophy or something? I don't want to be
someone's prize.
Right. Yeah, and it's also interesting that you bring up that Mormonism is still dominated by white men.
Yes, very much so.
I do know that in June of 1978 was when the president of the Mormon Church at the time actually revised the racial doctrine that was on the books.
I believe it was Ezra Taft Benson.
Oh, the Mormon president?
I believe so. Or Kimball. I'll have to look it up. Spencer W. Kimball or Ezra Taft Benson.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Kimball.
Okay. It's before my time.
Yeah. This is just based on the research I've done recently.
Oh, good.
But, Spencer W. Kimball announced a new revelation saying that black males could hold the priesthood and be ordained into the church.
Isn't that cool that they were people suddenly at 1978?
Yes, because in the Book of Abraham, I believe, which is part of the Pearl of Great Price, which Joseph Smith wrote, he came up with this insane belief that black people were part of the curse of Ham.
They were the mark of Cain.
Oh, the mark of Cain. Okay.
Black skin is the mark of Cain, and so they're inherently sinners. What I was taught growing up in the church in the 80s was the people that were born in the Mormon church are the ones that, there was a big war in heaven between Lucifer and Jesus. And with these plans, they said, what are we going to do with these humans on earth? And they produced these plans. This was my plan and this is Jesus's plan. And Lucifer's plan was make everybody be good. Force everybody to always be good. And Jesus's plan was free will and you have to choose to be good. And of course that was the better plan. And everyone that sided with Lucifer was cast out of heaven. And that's how we got all of the demons. And we all voted in heaven. And what I was taught was everyone that was solidly on Jesus' side from the beginning were born in America in these later days with all this technology and everything into a Mormon family and white. Anyone who was a fence sitter was born with darker skin or in a different country.
Wow.
Yeah. There's no racism in the Mormon church, though. They're totes progressive, so it's all good. Getting over those beliefs that were kind of just written into my daily life it's been difficult.
Yes, because Mormons believe that every single person had a pre-existence in heaven.
Correct. Our spirits are eternal. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try to wrap your brain around that. It hurts. It's a physical pain.
Well, yeah, Baptist Christianity at least doesn't teach that. There's actually a point at which we are non-existent and then come into existence. So
then what?
Yeah, but we are eternal in the sense that we persist
afterwards. Yeah.
So that's kind of a novel idea for a branch of Christianity to adopt.
Yeah.
Joseph
Smith was interesting.
He had a very vivid imagination.
Yes, he did.
And it's kind of a shame that he didn't channel that imagination into something like writing novels.
He used it for evil instead of good.
I'm sure his novels would be pretty bad too, but
the writing's not great. It's not great. There was actually another verse in the scripture. I believe it was in Doctrine and Covenants. I can't remember exactly where it is, but if I Google it, I can find it pretty quickly. But there was actually a scripture that said that it was talking about the early people in America, because that's where the Book of Mormon supposedly took place, that as they became more faithful and more in tune with God, they actually became lighter skinned. It actually said white and delightsome was the phrase, and it was removed in like 1987. But they changed it to something like lightness of spirit or something like that, but it was white and delightsome. And there were people back in the 60s and 70s that were adopting children from different cultures and different ethnicities and stuff, and would raise them in the church and hope that their skin would get lighter. It's really it's very sad, because it doesn't happen, because that's genetic and that's what you look like. And it would be like waking up every morning and willing my eyes to be a different color. You just can't do that, because that's the color. I mean, it's stupid. It's stupid. But there's an entire generation of people that are really resentful of their parents, their adopted parents, because they didn't get lighter skinned.
That's really bizarre and really sad at the same time.
It's damaging. I have some friends at the Lamanite generation. So
yeah, the Lamanites were supposed to be the bad people. Oh, the Native Americans. Okay,
they became Native Americans. Isn't that great? That the bad people in the Bible became the Native Americans in America.
Oh, they became Native Americans. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
I was familiar with the Nephites, the Lamanites, and there was
Nephites were white, and they were the good guys
because they were from Israel, and they embarked on a voyage to the New World.
They both came from the same environment. But when they became more wicked, they became darker skinned and more uncivilized. But then the Nephites all got wiped out, and so the bad guys actually won in the Book of Mormon. Spoiler. And then so now you don't have to read it. Hey. And then the Lamanites became the Native Americans that were the actual inhabitants of America.
Okay, but there were an original group of Native Americans. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the kind of the cosmology and the history of the Book of Mormon are the most interesting to me, because they're so insane.
It's written by someone who had like a 7th grade education and not a lot of archaeological or geographic knowledge of the area. Really, he was in upstate New York. Like, how did he know? He was just kind of guessing, and they keep moving it. It's a goalpost that keeps moving, and they're like, well, because when I was growing up, it was definitely there's places in the rainforest in Central or South America that they haven't been discovered. And now the more places that are being discovered, we're like, well, we're not really sure yet, because maybe God has moved it, or maybe he's buried it deeply. We're not really. He also changed the DNA, because they've done DNA testing to see if there's any traces to Jerusalem at all, or any traces, over to Israel at all. Right. With any Central American, South American, or North American early cultures. And of course there isn't. Of course not. But, anything to disprove it. And then God changed the DNA, because if it's that easy to prove that he's real, then it'll be too easy to have belief or faith in him, or I don't know. Yeah. That conversation was exhausting with my dad.
So when you talk about more and more places being discovered and it not being found, are you referring to the golden plates, which are still missing?
Oh, those were removed. They're up in heaven now. They're gone.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, because I was reading...
pretty sure they didn't ever exist, though. That's just...
I was reading a book by Paul Kurtz called The Transcendental Temptation, and this book was written in 1986, but it was republished a couple years ago. And Paul Kurtz is kind of considered the founding father of the skeptical movement.
Okay.
He kind of was the first he was a philosophy professor, and he was kind of the first to really get people together to do outreach on skepticism and to kind of challenge religious ideas. And he was an early champion of secular humanism. Well, I wouldn't say an early champion, but he was kind of the one that popularized the concept of secular humanism to a wider audience.
Okay.
And he was writing in 1986, and in this book, one chapter of which is on Mormonism, and he talks about how the plates have never been found. People are still looking for it. He didn't mention that they had been, the belief was that they had been removed to heaven, so maybe not at this time in the 80s. That belief hadn't developed yet.
And I think that's I believe it's in the Book of Mormon that they were removed or buried, but then the theory is that they were removed. But people believe that this is heaven. It just has to be purified. The earth has to be purified, but they believe that the earth will become heaven. So when it's removed to heaven, that might mean it's still here.
Yeah. So the
mental gymnastics, it's there's a lot.
Yeah. So like the cosmology and the history are two big things.
Yeah.
Which is why in my conversation with these two Mormon women, I kind of wanted to get them to educate me, because I was like, I'm going to share some things that I've heard about what Mormons think about the way the physical universe works and the way that history works. And please correct me so that I'm not strawmanning you, because I've heard some crazy things. And they said, go for it. And I said, one thing I asked them about was the belief that when a person dies, they become god of their own planet.
Eventually.
And
only men. I was really mad to find out that I didn't get my own planet.
So I asked, did the god of this planet, the Jesus Christ God, did he start out as human in some other universe?
Yes.
And they weren't really willing to go into that discussion. They were more interested in my skepticism about the veracity of the golden plates, and they really, really wanted me to read the what do you call it? The opening statement by
the testimony at the beginning, and
the 11 witnesses' testimony about the plates.
All of them left the church, I'm pretty sure,
or were excommunicated.
Yeah, because Joseph Smith didn't like people messing with him. Or not letting them marry his wives. He got really upset about that.
Yeah, so there were 11 witnesses. 3 of them were his closest disciples, and they testified basically just to the fact that, or just to the alleged fact that they saw an angel in the woods telling them that everything was true. And then the other 8 were just people, a lot of people within his own family.
Right.
Who just basically said, yeah, we saw the plates and they're the real deal. Even though
I don't know if they ever said they saw them or if they touched them, they felt them.
They stated that they saw the plates,
okay.
But there's a lot of that's disputed because according to other sources, they never actually saw the plates.
Right, because I think he had something wrapped and they touched it. They felt like the weight of it.
They were allowed to lift it and feel the weight. They weren't actually allowed to look at them.
To see it, right, because they couldn't handle it. Their puny human eyes couldn't handle it.
Yeah, so that's an interesting story in and of itself.
Story all of the different versions of everything.
Mm-hmm. The way Joseph Smith would put his head inside like a veiled hat thing and dictate what he was reading.
With his seer stones.
His seer stones and his
magic glasses.
Yeah.
That's not the version you're taught when you're a Mormon.
Oh, what
Absolutely not the version you're taught. You're taught that there's paintings in churches, probably to this day. I haven't been in a church in almost 5 years, but you're taught that he had the plates open next to him on a book and actually just was translating them out, just writing them.
So nobody was transcribing for him.
No, you're taught that he had some portions that were transcribed because the translation came so fast that he was just saying it out, and so people would transcribe. But all of the paintings that I've ever seen inside churches of Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon was just him sitting there with the plates open on a table, and he's just writing it down. And the first time I heard about the hat was when my siblings, they left the church about 10 years before me, actually, both my brother and sister. And they were asking me about the hat, and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And at that point in my life, I just had a baby, and I didn't have the brain capacity to actually deconvert. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're, talking crazy. And I just ignored him. But that was the first time I'd ever heard anything about a hat. Mm-hmm. And that was, well into my 20s.
Yeah. So essentially he was just coming up with whatever came to his mind and pretending like he was transcribing or translating rather golden plates that were revealed to him, disclosed to him by the angel Moroni on the hilltop Cumorah. And Ernest Taves, are you familiar with that name?
No.
He was a Mormon who left the church, deconverted, and became a skeptic. Wrote a book about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon called Trouble Enough.
Okay. And
the second part of that book, he did like a what's it called? Stylometric. He did a stylometric analysis of the Book of Mormon and came to the conclusion that this was all the product of one person's brain, basically. Whereas Joseph Smith claimed that the Book of Mormon is a document written by multiple prophets.
Okay.
And basically,
there's also a book written at the near the same time that shared a lot of similarities as far as storyline goes.
Yes, and I can't remember
something prophets, something.
Oh, it was A View of the Hebrews.
A View of the Hebrews.
That
I was way off. I didn't really dig deep into all of that stuff because once I deconverted, I listened to a lot of ex-Mormon podcasts to kind of like solidify my decision, but I didn't actually, I researched passively, but I didn't really want to go back into it and just re-educate myself, I guess. I was done. Like once I was done, I was done.
Yeah, it can be an exhausting process.
Right.
For sure. And yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. A View of the Hebrews, because it was written in 1825 by Ethan Smith, who was from Vermont. And so kind of the same general New England area.
And it was a fairly popular book. I've heard in some of my ex-Mormon podcasts and, in that world that it would have been something that was on people's bookcases or on their coffee table. It was a fairly well-known book at the time. And
many critics of Mormonism say that it's very likely that Smith was familiar with it because the ideas in that book were not just in that book. It was actually a fairly commonly held view in the 19th century that the Indians had a Hebraic origin.
Right.
Which is what this book argued. And so there's that source. There's also, of course, the King James Bible, which was the other book that Joseph Smith was familiar with. And you can...
He straight up copied entire chapters.
Yeah, you can clearly see the influence of the King James Bible in the translation. I've read the first maybe 50 pages of the Book of Mormon.
Don't do that.
Quite a while ago, I gave up, but I might have to just try it just so I can say I've read it. But I attempted it one time and made it about maybe 50 pages in, and it's kind of boring.
There's big battles at the end.
Oh, okay.
Wait until you get to the submarines. Those submarines are fun.
Yeah, I was just...
Transoceanic. There's 2 transoceanic voyages. 2.
Oh, 2 of them. Okay.
2. And one's in a submarine. It's pretty spectacular.
Oh, okay.
With animals and all your family and all that stuff. So
with a submarine, this must have been around... maybe I'm wrong. I'd have to check the dates, but this must have then been around the time that Jules Verne was writing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Maybe.
Because I know that classic novel was one of the first mentions of a submarine, and it was actually Jules Verne came up with the concept of the submarine before the submarine was actually invented. So
it was very likely then, because that way it was actually God that came up with it first.
Not Jules Verne.
Right. And the answer to all of the different source materials, if I channel my Mormon answer, is everyone has pieces of the truth, and there's only one church on the planet that had all of those pieces together into one whole. So when people would write a story about, postulating this concept or talking about this or, submarines or whatever, they all had bits and pieces of the truth, because everyone's born with the light of Christ, but it's not complete until you're actually baptized and given the Holy Ghost and all that. So that would be the answer to that. So there's an answer to every question.
So to kind of take a huge step back and get a few little historical details.
Okay.
So Joseph Smith has this vision when he's 17 in his bed, asleep at night. It's September 1823. Yeah, he's minding his own business, sleeping in bed. Then suddenly there's an angel standing over him, telling him that he's been chosen to be the vessel through which the world learns about which version of Christianity is the true one. And so...
Well, he'd prayed about it first and ask which of these churches is true.
Mm-hmm.
And that was his answer, was the angel came to him and told him none of them.
Mm-hmm. So this is something that's kind of interesting to me, that Joseph Smith didn't, until later in life, say that he had actually had two visitations, and one was actually at the age of 14.
Right.
His original story was that he was 17 when the angel Moroni came to him, but then later in life, in his personal writings, he said Moroni actually appeared to him before that, 3 years earlier.
There's like 4 different versions. It changed multiple times through different writings, and it kept getting more spectacular. And the final version is the one that's actually taught, which is he went out into a grove of trees at 14 years old and got down on his knees and prayed which of these churches is real. And God and Jesus both appeared to him as beings, and God said, "This is my beloved son, hear him." And then Jesus spoke and said, "None of them are the true religions."
Okay,
that's the version that's taught and shown up in pictures and everywhere. So,
okay, and Mormonism is a very interesting religion because it's kind of a product of its time. Because you had in the early to mid 1800s, you had
it's very much a Protestant religion. They don't admit it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they like to consider themselves as separate from the Protestants?
Separate from everybody.
Okay. Yeah, so it's interesting because Mormonism is a product of its time. It came about during a time in American history when religious revival was kind of the thing. It was in vogue, and there was, I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure it was a second Great Awakening. Maybe it was the first, I'm not sure. I'd have to check the dates again, but there were all these Great Awakenings going on in America at this time in history where everybody had like their own version of the truth and were trying to disseminate it and get it spread. And there were all these rival churches and rival beliefs about what Christianity really taught. And this was kind of the period in history when all the denominations kind of started separating.
Yeah, they all kind of branched out.
And it's interesting because America was kind of born through a process of Enlightenment reasons, like Enlightenment ideals. The founding fathers were very much influenced by reason and rationality and all these ideas that were coming out of the Enlightenment of challenging authority and thinking for yourself. And all these revival movements that Mormonism ultimately came out of were kind of a response to the to skepticism, basically. It was almost like a fear-based response saying, okay, we forged this country and won the struggle for independence, and now it was almost like, I see it as like this fear of if we don't get back to God, then we might lose what we've built here. And so I think it says something about human nature that all these religious movements were kind of springing up and vying for attention in the wake of something that was kind of a product of rationality and reason-based thinking.
That makes sense.
So it's been said by many that, and I see this myself in the few Mormon families I've encountered, that there's a great sense of community amongst Mormons, and they have a really close-knit family life, and they're extremely generous and kind and compassionate people, including to outsiders. I
disagree with the last part, but yeah.
Okay. So the sense of community amongst Mormons,
yes.
This part is true.
They're very big on Mormon community. The congregation's called a ward, and you're very involved and you care about your ward community and your family. It's your family. And everything you do is with them. You go to church 3 hours on Sunday. The youth go to church for an hour and a half in the middle of the week. If they're in high school, they do early morning seminary for an hour every morning. So and then there's meetings. If you're in any kind of leadership position, or if you're a teacher, you have teacher meetings basically all the time. And then there's visiting teaching, which is the women visiting other women.
Okay.
You have a list of assignments but it's basically assigned friends. You have to check in on them regularly. You have to visit them at least once a month. If they're sick, you bring them food. If they have a baby, you watch their other kids, and, you help them out as much as you can. And you're visited by people also. It's teams of 2, you're visited. And then home teachers visit the entire family, and they take care of the entire family. And it's the same thing. It's men visiting to take care of, entire families. And so you kind of become close to the people you visit, the people who visit you, your little group of people. And so it becomes just a very insular environment. Mm-hmm. You don't know many people that aren't Mormon. You don't hang out with many people that aren't Mormon because you don't have time. It's a lot of time sucks. So, and then if you have, boys in scouting programs, it's more time. So it's a lot of time. Outside of the church, they're very good neighbors.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, is that they have a very neighborly disposition.
They're quiet. They'll bring you muffins when you first move in. If you have a baby, they'll bring you a casserole or something, but they're not going to donate to the Salvation Army. Well, I wouldn't either. I mean, you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But they're not going to donate to the Salvation Army or go above and beyond as far as good deeds or service goes to their community, because they honestly believe that if they give their tithings to the church, it's doing better. It's doing more good and more work. So it's actually, everything stays within the church. They're very charitable and very good within their own organization. But, the homeless man down the street, they're not going to give money to. They're going to give more to their church in hopes that that'll trickle down to him.
Now, do you think that they engage in any kind of, for lack of a better word, propaganda? Do they try to convince outsiders that they are kind of humanitarian givers and care?
Oh, they're really big. Yeah, the church is very big at taking pictures of them doing service.
Okay.
But most of it, I don't think it's so much for outside of the church as much as it is for inside the church, to show members how much good their tithes are going towards. So they'll take pictures of, a natural disaster, and they'll show up in their yellow shirts, and it's actual work. It is actual work. But if you look at the percentage of the tithing that actually goes towards humanitarian efforts, it's so incredibly low, because they're building massive buildings and they're furnishing them with very ornate furniture. And all of the presidency members are getting salaries, and they're not giving away as much as they say they are.
Okay. Yeah, they're building also secret temples for...
Yeah, and they are, if you've ever looked up the interior of a temple, they look like palaces inside. Mm-hmm. But they are very, very elegant and ornate, and they're beautiful. But I've also read reports, I do not know, I haven't fact checked it, but I've read reports that they change out the furniture every couple of years and destroy it because it's been in a sacred place. And so the furniture is actually destroyed. I don't know if that's true, but I heard it and read it. So it's hearsay.
Okay. So yeah, this was something that came up in my conversation with these Mormon missionaries, was the secret temple, which is open only to the initiated, or open only to people who have achieved a certain level of devotion.
You have to have a temple recommendation. Or recommend. Temple recommend.
And they were talking about, one of them was talking about how she experienced the temple and how it just changed her whole life and was just the most beautiful, most awe-inspiring thing she had ever
it's super weird.
encountered. She was telling me that, I can't share anything about what's inside with you, but I can.
It's sacred, not secret.
Yeah. So, you said it's just super weird.
It's super weird. And you convince yourself that it's a spiritual experience, and that's why you feel so uncomfortable, because you're so uncomfortable with so much spirituality. But it's ritualistic and it's super weird. It's nothing is more cultish than a Mormon temple ceremony.
Okay, and it's my understanding that the Mormon temple ceremonies basically draw heavily from Freemasonry.
Yes, because Joseph Smith was a Freemason.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, it's lots of symbolism, and men and women are separated, but that's not even the weirdest part. The weirdest part is the initiatory, which is before that, and it's the washing and anointing, and now you are able to keep on your garments, the sacred underwear. When I went through, the only time I ever went through the temple for my, way back in the day, was you were actually naked during the initiatory. So you sit in a chair, you have like this shield on that it's slit open all the way on both sides. So it's basically just wearing like
a hospital gown.
Yeah. Only the slits are on the sides, not in the back.
Okay.
And it went all the way up. Like it basically just went over you like one of those cardboard sandwich signs or sandwich board signs, sort of. And I was massively pregnant. So I was super uncomfortable, but I'm sitting up in this little chair and they do this initiation and they say this prayer and then they anoint you with oil at various points in your body. And it's, like your breast, but they don't like touch your breast, but they touch your chest. But they put their hand underneath the shield and touch you, like your skin. And it's super uncomfortable. That's like, that part creeped me right out.
So, why is it, demonic when the Satanic Church does that kind of thing, but not when the Mormon Church does it?
Because we're right.
It's almost like they're trying to make the initiates as uncomfortable as possible so that they don't think too much about how wrong it all is. And
I don't know. It used to be fully nude. It used to be you used to stand in a tub and they would do some kind of initiatory like with oil, and then you'd step out of the tub and then they'd put the garments on, because you have to cleanse your body in order to put on the sacred garments, and that's what it's for. But now you can put on the garments prior to that. But up until, I don't know when they changed it, but I know when I went through in 2003, I was naked under the shield. And then up until, I believe, I can't remember when they changed it, but it was before I went through in 2003, during the actual ceremony, you did blood oaths. Like you swore fealty to the church with a blood oath. Like you would slit your own throat.
Wow.
Up until, I can't remember when those went away, but it was
slit your
early
own,
enough that,
slit your own throat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's symbolism, and then you do this thing where you would draw your thumb across your neck. But I don't know when that was removed. But I know my parents had to have done it because they went through years before me.
Yeah, like just draw your thumb across your throat, but an actual knife, or
and then your other hand is down to like catch your blood. Or
how did they ensure people don't die by slitting their own throat with, like, was it actually?
No, it was just your thumb. Oh. It was just a symbolism. It was a blood oath. You were just making the oath of, We won't talk about what's going on in this temple, and we won't talk about it. A threat of death under.
Okay, I was taken aback there for a second because I thought you were literally talking about slitting your own throat. Okay.
No,
I was like,
but in the actual temple ceremony, you go into a room that's very beautiful. I was a little disappointed because I thought you build up, it's the sacred and the secret thing that you don't know about your entire life. Mm-hmm. And so you go through it, you have it built up in your head. You're like, what is it going to be? Is it going to be like church? Is it going to be so special? Is it going to change my life? What's going to happen? And you go in and men and women are branched off in different sides of the room, and you're wearing very beautiful white clothes. Everybody's in all white, and you have, all of these different steps, and they actually just played a video.
Okay.
It was just a video, and it was the Adam and Eve story. That's all it was.
Yeah, that I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking of like the mystique that they build up about it, and kind of intimidate people into not being let down or not expressing how let down they were. I
was super disappointed.
Yeah, it's kind of like what hypnotists do, where they try to they do their hypnotism thing to the volunteers, and they describe to the audience what the person being hypnotized is doing, and they give and they tell the person being hypnotized what to do, and it all looks like the person being hypnotized is being completely controlled, but that's not really the case.
It's just the suggestion.
They're the person being hypnotized. There's such ceremony surrounding it that the person being hypnotized doesn't want to embarrass.
Well, they don't want to be the one that it doesn't work on.
They don't want to be the one it doesn't work on, but also they don't want to embarrass the hypnotist.
Right.
And so it just all results in this kind of spectacle.
That's a very good analogy, actually.
Yeah, it all results in this spectacle that makes it look like the hypnotist has a real ability. And I kind of see the same kind of thing going on with the temple.
Yeah, they played a video. There's a big screen in the front, and there's apparently in the Salt Lake Temple, in the big Salt Lake Temple that's like center of Salt Lake City, they still do the live performance. And there's a couple other temples they do it sometimes, but it's just a video. And they actually had to refilm it and have a new video filmed because the guy that played Satan actually got excommunicated. He was the best actor anyway. He actually does movies, like he's a real actor. But I can't remember who it was. He was the best because he actually breaks the fourth wall and talks to the audience. It's like any one of these people who blah, blah, blah. Like he makes threats to you. As it goes on, they pause it, or it has natural pauses, I guess, but it stops and you put on articles like on top of your clothes. Like there's a draped thing that goes across. There's a hat. Well, women have a veil to cover their face, and there's an apron that symbolizes, Adam and Eve. And so by the time you're done, you look super goofy. You look really goofy because you stand up at certain places and you do all these hand symbols, and there's still part of the blood oath thing, but it's been removed, like the actual sliding across your neck. But you do this thing where you touch your shoulder and then you have your hand down, but you don't actually drag your thumb across. But then you go through, that's finished, and then you symbolize going through the veil into heaven. And there's this curtain behind the screen goes up, and there's this curtain behind there, and there's old men on the inside who represent God, and you have your new name, and you have to do the symbols that you just learned during the video, the film, and you have to repeat the symbols back to them, show them like hand symbols and stuff back to them. It's like secret handshakes, and they say a phrase to you and you have to say the phrase back. And it's very Masonic in nature. And I remember being weirded out because they have to like hug you a certain way. And I felt like I was being felt up by some old guy. And then there's old ladies that are standing there next to you, helping you remember things. And then you're pulled through the veil, and then you go into this gorgeous room, absolutely gorgeous room, but it's silent. Mm-hmm. And they said, here's where you can reflect and talk about everything you just learned, or reflect about everything you just learned. But you can't, here's where it really bugged me. Well, the whole thing, it creeped me out enough that I never went back. Honestly, I never went back. Mm-hmm. No, that's not true. I went back one other time with my best friend. I went the first time in Dallas, and then I went with my best friend in Tucson or in Arizona. And, like a couple weeks afterwards, but I never went back again because it weirded me out to the point that I was like, I am going to be a Mormon that never goes to the temple because it was so weird. It was just so weird to me. But you go into this room and you sit down on it's probably the most beautiful room in the entire temple because everything is so just ornate and plush and rich looking and it's gorgeous. It's an absolutely gorgeous room. Silent. You're not allowed to talk. And there's tissues everywhere. And you're supposed to just sit there and reflect on the spirituality of being in the temple. And you can stay as long as you want. And because your session ended, the next session's starting, and then they'll come in eventually, and you stay as long as you want, and then you can get up and leave. But what bothered me is I was always told my entire life is you can't talk about the temple or the things that go on in the temple outside of the temple. But inside the temple, the only place you're actually given to sit down and reflect on things, you can't talk. There's nowhere set up for actually sitting down and discussing what goes on inside the temple.
It just all has to be internalized and...
yes.
Okay. That's interesting. And
which bothered me because I like to talk about things and I wanted to know, I had a lot of questions and everybody was sitting there bawling their eyes out and I'm looking around and everybody's in goofy hats and veils and aprons. And I was like, I remember looking over at my husband and he had this like baker hat on, kind of. It was like this little sideways hat and this little tassel that kept falling in his face. And he looked so ridiculous that I was trying not to laugh out loud. And everybody's sobbing because it's such a moving and spiritual experience. And I did not get that at all.
I wonder if the feature of silence and the not being able to talk to anybody, I wonder if that's the whole point, is because people might have questions and they don't want, and questions might be inconvenient for something sacred like this.
I don't know. It bothered me. So what they say is you just put it up on your shelf. Like you ignore it. You file it away for later. Cause I was pregnant with my first kid. I have 3 children now. I didn't have time. I didn't have the capacity. So I just put it up on my shelf and ignored it. So that's what you do. You're just like, well, I'm not going to think about that. And you just mom real hard.
I guess that answers kind of my next question, which was, while a Mormon, were there any parts of the faith that did not sit well with you?
Lots.
What are some other things that didn't sit well with you?
Well, I was always a feminist. I was raised by they're not super open-minded, but they're fairly open-minded as far as Mormons go. I was raised not racist. Because what I was talking about earlier is the teachings of the church, not my teachings at home.
Okay.
Because I grew up in an area that was very multicultural. And so it was not, we were just kind of like, we had friends of all races, all religions. Like we weren't taught that we were better than anyone else.
Okay.
I was raised in that an education is important, even for women. But the problem is when I went to church, I was told, as long as you're a mom first and, in case something happens to your husband, it's like a backup, not an actual thing to do. So I was raised, but my mom is very vocal, very strong-willed. She would be liberal if she wasn't Mormon. We almost got her to vote for Hillary, but she didn't. She threw away her vote on a third party, but we almost got her there. Sorry. I don't know where you stand. I'm like assuming. I don't know.
What was that?
I'm just assuming here. I'm like saying things like that.
Oh yeah. Well, I voted for Hillary, so you're all good.
Okay. Well, I tell people I voted for Trump. I didn't.
Just to see their reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be over at their house. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to vote for him again. But it was like, so I was raised by these fairly progressive people, and then I'd go to church and hear things that kind of bumped up against it. And so I had this thing in my head, like, I'm taught that evolution is real at school and at home. And then at church, they're kind of like, well, it's kind of a gray area. It's one of those things you ask God. And then I was raised in like this, watered down feminist environment And then I'd go to church and I was told that, my sole purpose in life is to marry a returned missionary and have babies. And I'm a very strong-willed person, and I'm, very ambitious and stuff. So it's it went against who I am as a person. I had to, in order to become that wife and mother, I had to tamp down a lot of my basic nature. So lots of antidepressants. And no therapy.
Yeah, that's really tough.
It's hard.
So you put these questions up on a shelf for later.
Yeah. Go back. Yeah, circle back. Yeah, that's right. I did. I put everything back up on a shelf. And then once that shelf cracks or falls down, you don't just have the one that broke that shelf. You have everything that's bothered you for years. And it all comes flooding back over the course of, however much time. And then you start questioning everything in your entire life, because every choice you've ever made was based on, prayer or consulting, a patriarchal leader in your church or something, like everything.
Mm-hmm. So was there a straw that broke the camel's back? Was there like a...
Actually, yes.
Okay. So I was going to say, was there like one moment where it finally just...
I remember the exact moment.
Okay. Because for some people leaving whatever religion...
It's more of a period of time. Mine, I literally walked into a classroom. I was a humanities class of Mormon, and I walked out, and I'm pretty sure I was mostly an atheist. And it didn't have anything to do with the class itself. It was just the things we were talking about in that class just triggered my thought process. Mm-hmm. So I actually talked about this on my show this week.
Yeah, I listened to it.
Well, this one. This is the one that just came out.
Yeah, and I was listening to it, and I was thinking to myself, oh, damn, they beat me to it. Like, they beat me to this interview.
Okay. Well, so yeah, about a week or so before, I was watching a Nova or something on PBS about marketing, because I have this interest in marketing, and it was talking about Coca-Cola and how it's the most recognizable brand in the entire world. And they actually went to like these remote African villages and places in the rainforest and like all these very remote, hard to get to places. And there's Coca-Cola is available. There's like Coca-Cola machines. And they talked about, because they have local distribution where they have the factories, it actually helps the community because they have jobs and they have factories and they have, truck drivers to get them to these remote locations. And that's their plan, is to be one of the most recognizable brands in the world. And they also talked about the shape of the canister and how it's actually trademarked. And, so you see an empty Coke can, even if it has everything removed from it, and it's a Coke can. Or not a Coke can, but like a bottle, the plastic bottle.
Yep.
Because that shape is actually trademarked. So it was very interesting. So I had that in the back of my mind. And then I went into a humanities class, and we were talking about the Fertile Crescent and the early nomadic humans. It's a really, really benign subject matter. Mm-hmm. And this was in November in, 2015, November 2014. Mm-hmm. So it's early in the year-ish in humanities class, because school had started in like August. So, I guess middle of the year. And so we're sitting there talking about it, and it just kind of hit me that the world is older than I can even comprehend. There's more humans than I can possibly imagine. And then I had this question in the back of my mind. It was like, why the fuck was the only true church given to a white boy in upstate New York, when the world is so much like, actually, if you look at the percentage of the entire world, most of it's not white. Mm-hmm. And then he was all the way in upstate New York. How would he dispense that to everyone in the world if it was the only true religion? And so then I kind of started thinking about, why would Coca-Cola have a better marketing strategy than God? That's where I went, was, if that was such a great plan and such a great strategy, and if it was the truth, he would release it like 20 different places at the same time. Mm-hmm. It would be like a full rollout. And that would make sense to me. I'm like, there's no way I can be better at coming up with plans than God, because I'm just some, random human chick. So it just everything. And then he started questioning everything, because once you allow yourself to think maybe it's not true, you actually start seeing all the holes in it. Mm-hmm. And then I started examining other religions kind of in the same thing. Well, what about God? Well, what about the Bible? What about this? And it's a house of cards, as you know, obviously. It all falls apart once you kind of allow yourself to look at anything critically. And so by the time I walked out of that classroom, I stopped listening to her. I just started writing down all of my questions. And she's actually my friend, and I told her that I attributed my loss of faith to her. She was like, don't do that. She was like, that's not my fault. I'm like, no, thank you. And she was like, oh, okay, you're welcome, but don't do that. Don't tell people that. But I walked out, and I just kind of processed this for weeks. I started reading obsessively. I started listening to some podcasts that were recommended to me. There were a couple that were really big back those days.
Back when
they're now behind.
Back when podcasting was like new and nobody was doing it.
Right. But now they're behind paywalls because that's what they do. But there was one that really just kind of helped solidify that I did the right choice. The guy that was doing it was just so amazing at the time, and he would just sit there and ask these questions and like, yes. And then he would go into detail on how it was ridiculous and how it didn't make any sense when you actually thought about it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And so finally, about 3 weeks of just processing this all by myself, I went to my husband and told him, don't think I believe in the church anymore. And I'm not sure where I stand on God. And he was like, okay. I was like, wow. Okay. All right. Because, that's a deal. It's a deal breaker.
Yep.
It's a deal breaker. I married him, a good Mormon woman. And well, I wasn't really a Mormon woman. I was 19. I don't really think that counts as a woman.
Okay.
It's a good Mormon child bride. And that's a deal breaker. Like I flipped the script on him, and he was okay with it. And he took the kids to church for 6 months on his own. But that entire 6 months, we talked about it obsessively, and I showed him my evidence, and he would question it and say, what about this? And what about the source material? And so I would go to the LDS site itself and pull the same material and show him that it was actually verified and stuff. So about 4 months into the 6 months of him taking the kids by himself, he no longer believed in the church, but he kept going for the next 2 months because he couldn't comprehend, and I couldn't either, raising the kids without the church. Mm-hmm. Until they started bringing home information, and I felt like I had to do damage control every week.
Right.
We gave them the options and told them, they're welcome to keep going. We'll drive them and drop them off, or we can find people to take them, but we are no longer going to take them. And none of them wanted to go. My youngest, my daughter at the time was only 2. She didn't want to go at all. She didn't care. She was mad that she's out of the class that had snacks at this point. And my oldest, he was the only one that thought about it, but he had issues in Scouts, and so he was over that. And then my middle son said he was really relieved that we finally wised up that religion was stupid, because he actually figured it out a year before us, and he just didn't tell us.
Oh, wow. Good for him.
Well, he figured out Santa wasn't real. He said, this is just you, and basically people make wishes and they figure it out. He was like 7 or 8 or something. And then he was like, you know what? God is Santa for grown-ups. And we were like, whoa, too far. We were like, dial it back. Like, he made that connection, and we, told him no, but now he's like, I was the first atheist in this family. Like, he's super proud now.
Well, see, I became a born-again Christian when I was 7. I didn't discard that belief until I was 20. So,
yeah,
that's pretty untypical for a child who kind of absorbs information and absorbs what the authority figures are telling him.
He's an interesting kid. He fought his baptism. You get baptized at 8, and he stood on the steps screaming.
Wow.
Screaming. He fought it. And finally we convinced him to get baptized, and I still feel really bad about that we forced him to be baptized, and which is full immersion, and he was scared of water. And so he decided that that wasn't for him.
Yeah, the story of how you and your husband kind of both or you kind of let him out
Yeah, I destroyed my whole family, basically.
It's very similar to the two previous guests I had on a couple weeks ago, Jenica and Patrick Crail. I'm not sure if you know who they are. They host the Real Life Beyond Faith podcast together. And they were a Christian couple who both became atheists together as a married couple. Okay. And Jenica deconverted first, and then she led her husband Patrick out of it. It took him longer, but he eventually joined her in unbelief. So it's interesting that you kind of have that similar story going on.
Yeah, it was scary. And that's what I actually mentioned it when I talked about this in my podcast last week. It was really hard for me to wrap my brain around, because I know that me making this decision as the mother, I'm changing the course of my children's lives and their children, like all the way down my line. Just like the person who converted to Mormonism changed my life. So I had to make sure that I was doing the right thing and the best based on the information that I had in front of me, because that felt like a really big responsibility.
Yeah, this is why I just can't agree with people who, mostly Christian apologists who say that people deconvert for the wrong reasons, or for reasons that aren't justified, or they just want to sin, they just want to rebel.
Yeah, I heard that. My dad told me it was I was taking the easy path. I was like, really? You think that losing all my friends and half my family is the easy path?
Exactly.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not just a phase. It's not just being rebellious.
No,
it's not just being trying to be different and edgy. It's actually a life-changing thing that can be terrifying for a lot of people.
It was destructive. And we didn't move. There's a lot of people that leave the church and then move because it's so uncomfortable, or they pretend to be faithful until they can find a way to move. We stayed in the exact same house, in the exact same school district, in the exact same everything. I live in a very, very Mormon area, heavily populated Mormon area, which is why we live where in the area that we live in. I believe someone told me once that the school district is 20% Mormon or something. It's pretty high. I live in Texas, but it's just, this area is just very, very Mormon. And, but yeah, we left. We left as quietly as we possibly could, but everybody knows we left. And, we didn't move. And so I live 4 doors down from one Mormon. I live, another one lives right. She's not the house behind me, but across the street from the house behind me. They're everywhere. The crossing guard, they're everywhere. So I'll drive my kids to school or pick them up from school, and I used to be super embarrassed about them seeing me looking bad or in a tank top, because, your shoulders have to be covered up if you're a Mormon woman.
Okay. And
so I tried really hard for probably the first 2 years after I left. I would put on makeup and I would do my hair and I would, be modest according to them, because I wanted to look like I was still doing great after I left the church. Like, I wanted to still be I still wanted to show that I was doing really well and okay. It was weird. It's like, and I would wave to everybody and smile all the time and just be, and life on Facebook was just, everything was sunshine and roses and just great. And I didn't complain or anything because I wanted to.
So you didn't become like the angry atheist who gets angry about how they kind of like wasted their whole life on this belief. And so now they're going to be very vocal about it. And,
I went I didn't talk about religion prior to leaving the church. And so I just kept that same level. I'm just very quiet about it. And, I wanted to be the person that when someone finds out I'm an atheist, they're shocked. I don't want to announce it or people know ahead of time or anything. Like yesterday, I had this conversation with one of my children's moms, and she works for a children's ministry, and she was telling me all about it. And she said she would pray for me, and, cause I'm going through a rough time right now. And so she's like, I'll pray for you. And I'm like, well, thank you. I just say thank you. And I'm super nice because I wait until people really like me and then say, no, no, thank you. I'm not going to go to church with you, or I'm actually an atheist. Because then I completely break all of those conceptions that they have in their heads of these angry, volatile, monstrous people.
Yep.
I want to be as, for lack of a better word, as Christian as possible, that fit and that break that stereotype and that mold, because I am the same person that I always was. I didn't go around talking about religion prior. I was just me. And then when someone would ask me to church, I would just say, oh, no, thank you. I have a church family. I'm Mormon. Now I'll just say, oh, no, thank you. I'm an atheist. It's the same. I decided to be just the same. Just not religious. My kids are very vocal about being atheist. And I have to dial my daughter back in and tell her to stop telling her friends that God doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think there's...
Because she makes her friends cry.
Oh. Yeah, I think there's...
And those are...
I think there's value in that. Like, not every atheist has to, like, be public about it and be vocal about it. We need those voices to challenge religion, but there's also value in just being yourself and showing people that atheists aren't bad people just by being yourself.
Absolutely.
So there is value in that, because sometimes having somebody who's constantly putting the message out, which we need, but it doesn't do. But
everybody can be an activist in their own way, and they need to. It's like I tell my kids all the time: read the room. I know my community, and I know that me being a well-liked member of my community is it's a good tool. And then when they find out that I'm not religious, then when they find out I'm atheist, it actually does more good, I think, as far as making atheism acceptable, because they like me. It's like, how do you wrap your brain around the fact that, but I like her, but she's a good mom, but she doesn't have horns, like all of these things are like, but I've never seen her eat a baby. I don't think she eats meat very regularly. Like, I don't like this, all of this stuff. It's just, it just, in my personal community, because it's so Southern Baptist, and Mormon. It's that those two are the predominant members of my community. So, yeah.
How do Mormons treat apostates? Are they shunned, or
Yes, they're shunned.
Okay, so the families generally don't accept family members who leave the faith.
It's up to the family. The community itself shuns you to a certain extent. There are those brave souls that have stayed in touch with me. Some to their own detriment, because they also left the church afterwards. Every now and then someone will bring me cupcakes or cookies or something, and I, take them and say thank you. But most people don't talk to me anymore. They avoid eye contact. They unfriended me on Facebook. They don't wave to me when I wave back to them in the car lines. There was one day I was just watching Facebook because I knew it was going to come out that I was, not only had left the church, but was pretty solidly in the secular side of things. I lost 32 friends one day, just in one day.
Oh, wow.
This was a couple of years ago. And I'll go and check on people every now and then, and it's just slowly been removing themselves over the years. And then I have cousins that unfriended me. I have family members that don't speak to me. My parents do speak to me, and my in-laws still spoke to my husband, but there's always this disappointment in the back of the conversation. Yep.
I know, like 9-10 years ago, my Facebook friends were populated 90% Christian, and now it's completely opposite. It's about 9.
It flips.
Yeah, my friends list now is 90% or more atheist, and
mine is too. And you know what? They're better friends, honestly.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that it wasn't like, it's not something I noticed.
No, and you didn't do it on purpose.
Yeah, it's like it was a very gradual flip that I didn't like. It was only one day a couple months ago I kind of just realized, like, looking through my memories, like, yeah, all my friends have changed, and a lot of these friends aren't here anymore. And I just didn't really notice how much the demographics of my friends list changed from religious to non-religious.
Yeah, mine did that too. I still have some people that are sticking it out. My neighbor that lives 4 doors down, she still comments on things and likes everything. But my entire extended family is still, obviously they're still, Facebook friends and stuff. And I just quiet about it. I just quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I have the Secular Soup Instagram page to get my horrible meme outlets, and I have the podcast to say all the terrible things that I actually feel. So I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all right.
Well, I guess we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes now, which is
I know.
which is surprising to me because like single interviews are hard for me to like keep the conversation going. So I didn't know if
I talk a lot.
I didn't know if I'd be able to do it or not with because this is actually the first interview I've done for my podcast that's just with one other person, you.
Okay.
Like my 3 other shows, one's a 2-parter, which is why this is number 5, but the 3 other ones were with two other people. So
okay.
I guess in kind of wrapping up, I did get a really interesting question from my friend Jack Wathy, who's really interesting guy. He wrote a book called The Illusion of God's Presence.
Interesting.
And he's what is the title? He's an evolutionary biologist, but he works with computer programs and works with like mapping evolutionary algorithms. Anyway, really interesting guy. He's written a lot about religion.
Well, because it has a lot to do with the answers to those questions that are wrong.
Yeah. He writes about religion as a neurobiological phenomenon. Really interesting guy. Anyway.
Almost sounds like God is made in our image.
Yeah. He asked, what do you think about plural marriage, polygyny, in Mormon fundamentalism? More specifically, what about this argument I sometimes hear? If we can legalize same-sex marriage, why not legalize polygyny for religious groups that want to practice it, such as Mormons, Muslims, etc.?
I actually don't have a problem with it as long as they're consenting adults and everybody's on the same page and there's no abuse being done. If someone is happy with in a relationship with a man who has 2 other wives, I honestly don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page. I think think what makes polygamy in Mormonism so insidious is that there is no choice involved, and it is a forced situation.
In a lot of cases, yes. Yeah.
I think consent makes all the difference, and I know a few people who
just like every situation.
Yeah, and I know more than one person. I know a few people who identify as poly, and they're
me too. Yeah,
and they're in very happy and fulfilling relationships.
Absolutely.
So I agree with you there. And is there anything you want to leave off with? Any words of wisdom or anything like that?
I guess to the people listening, just be nice to the missionaries when they come over because they're little kids. They're 18 and 19 years old and they don't know better. Be super nice to them, be friendly to them, offer them water. Let them use your phone to call their parents because they can only talk to their mom twice a year. Seriously, Mother's Day and Christmas are the only times they get to talk to their parents.
Really?
Yeah, it's a very much controlled environment. They're just little kids. And if the friendlier you are, the more likely they are to listen to you. So just being angry and arguing with them about points of the church isn't going to get your foot in the door. Being super kind to them and telling them and then dropping just sliding in some question that maybe will blow their mind. But you never know. It might not happen immediately. You never know what seeds you're planting. Those seeds of doubt.
Yeah.
Because there's people that I know that left the church now and they start talking about people they talked to on their missions 20 years ago. This guy made a good point and this lady made a good point and this person made a good point. It's there. It stays. You just have to do it right.
And that's actually really encouraging to me because the 2 young women I spoke with for about 2 hours, they left that conversation saying, well, we obviously don't agree with you, but you gave us a lot to think about. So.
Good. Let them think. They need to think for themselves because the church actually teaches you to ask God, not Google. So learning to think for yourself is the best thing you can do for yourself.
Yeah. Just don't offer them coffee or tea, right?
No, just be nice. Just give them water. I helped one of the sisters that came over to my house once register for school because she was leaving soon, and I helped her register for school, and I signed her up for FAFSA, and I was helping her with all of her school stuff because I was talking to her about education and don't get married right away. Educate yourself, and because I thought that would probably be the best thing for her. And they transferred the sisters out the next day and put men in, or the elders, and I wasn't allowed. I'm not allowed to be in the same room with the elders by myself, so took away that from when they stopped visiting me. I think I was blacklisted by the missionaries for a while.
Oh, that's too bad.
After that incident.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you.
Sorry, I started another story.
Oh, that's fine. You can finish it if you want, or...
No, it's good. That was it.
Okay.
That was it. Register her for school. Hopefully she went.
Well, great. This interview went really well, I feel. It was really interesting. Thank you for joining me, and especially since this is a new podcast and not everybody might be willing to come talk to me, since it's like completely new and they don't know like how well it's going to do and all that. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me so early on, and check out Secular Soup podcast.
Yeah, we're awesome.
Mm-hmm. It's better than this show so far.
We're just ridiculous and funny.
Mm-hmm. And with that, that's all I have. You'll hear me when I speak next. Thanks for joining me.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to A Leap of Doubt. If you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. If you want to get involved in the kinds of discussions this show is meant to encourage, you can find a discussion group on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/ALOP discussion. You can follow me and get in touch with me on Twitter, where my username is @thenatheist. Feedback and criticisms are always welcome. The opening clip is an excerpt from the audiobook God Is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens, courtesy of Hachette Audio. Text copyright 2007 by Christopher Hitchens. Audio production copyright 2007 Hachette Audio. Used with permission. The music is Jade by Esther Nicholson and is used under license. Audio edited by Callie Wright of the Gaytheist Manifesto Podcast and Answer Media LLC.